Hi, and welcome to 12 Questions Memphis. Now, we're out here at the Great Oaks Church of Christ in the Wolf Chase area. If you're not familiar with Churches of Christ, our goal is to simply be Christians. We try to be undenominational followers of Jesus. And if you have any questions about that, we'd love to talk to you about that. We spent all summer long asking Memphis, if you could ask God one question, what would it be? And this is our final session of the week, question number 12. And these last two late night sessions we've called Memphis Issues. Last night we got to talk about racism. Dr. Harold Redd had some great thoughts about a cross-centered approach to racism. And tonight we're going to talk about poverty. What can we do to fight poverty? Poverty is an issue we talk about a lot here in Memphis. Memphis is always ranked among the most impoverished cities in our nation. A report earlier this year said 8 out of 10 Memphis children grow up in poverty. And so it's something we're always wrestling with as a city. And what we've done tonight, we've invited two men who are on the front lines of trying to find ways to help fight against poverty from a faith-based perspective. And they're going to come share their thoughts with us tonight. We've got Ron Wade. He's from here in Memphis. He works with a local nonprofit called Hope Works that specializes in helping the poor find employment. We also have Larry Cantrell, who's made the trip from Nashville, and we appreciate him making that drive down. He works with Nashville Inner City Ministry, the executive director of that program. So we've got two guys that know what they're talking about, who see all the challenges and the joys that come with working and trying to help out with poverty. But we want you to be part of the conversation as well. So you'll see scrolling at the bottom of your screen 5 ways you can get in touch with us. And if you're here, we have a few that have hung around for the late night session. We appreciate that. Pull out your phone, get ready to give us your thoughts, your comments, your questions. Whether it's text, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or email, we want your thoughts. And what we're going to do, we're going to let these guys talk for a few minutes each and share some things, about 12, 15 minutes each, share some things from their perspective about this question. And then we're going to take about a 3-minute break. We're going to take your questions and then bring them back up and let your questions be asked and hear what they have to say. So we want this to be a conversation. You hear something you like, let us know. You hear something you don't like, let us know. You have a question, let us know. We want to have a conversation about these issues. We're going to watch a video to introduce the topic, and then Ron Wade's going to come speak to us about the question, what can we do to fight poverty?
A question for you. What about poverty? Poverty's an ugly reality that we'd rather ignore. Have we reached a point where we are easily able to ignore poverty? Is ignoring poverty going to make it go away, like that monster that lives under your bed? In fact, the ironic thing about poverty, ignoring it is what feeds it. How do we begin to help the poor in Memphis? It's such an overwhelming situation. What can we do to fight poverty?
All right. It's great to be with you tonight. 12 questions. I know they've been very challenging for you, and so the topic that I have to address is what can we do to fight poverty? First of all, let me tell you just a tad about myself. I'm Ron Wade. I'm a native Memphian. I've been working with Hope Works, which is a faith-based, nonprofit organization that provides hope and a job for the chronically unemployed in Memphis. I want to talk about this topic from several different angles, kind of like a clock. And so the first way to talk about how to help fight poverty is one, to acknowledge and accept the fact that we have a certain amount of prejudice, ignorance, apathy, and fear. So let me break those down for you just a little bit. Prejudice, most of us that have interest in helping people in poverty from a faith-based perspective feel like that why don't they, being those in poverty, why don't they just get a job? In fact, a really good friend of mine in Cincinnati told me that he heard that question so often that he wrote a book, and the title was, Why Don't They Just Get a Job? And sometimes in middle class America, we think, well, someone who's in poverty, they should just pull themselves up by the bootstraps and get a job. Well, the fact of the matter is, it's not quite that easy. There are some legitimate reasons why some, not all, do not work. The other thing is the idea of just ignorance. There's a statement that says, the more you know, the more you realize how little you know. And sometimes just having the zeal to help people in poverty isn't enough. It's not enough, and you can't become quite as effective. One example of that is someone coming out of prison. And I'll talk about that hopefully just a little bit more as we go through this. But when you think of somebody going to prison, you think, well, they've committed a crime, they go do the time, and so when they get out, they just get a job. Well, the fact of the matter is, it's pretty tough for someone coming out of prison, even though they've done the time, to get a job. Recidivism is a major issue. The other thing is just apathy. Sometimes we're just too busy to really invest time in someone. I've got a job, I've got a family, I've got church responsibilities, and I really don't have time to get involved with someone else. So it's this apathy piece. The other thing is fear. Sometimes helping someone in poverty, they don't look like me, they don't smell like me, they don't talk like me, and so I'm maybe a little fearful. Or maybe the fear factor is the fact that if I really get real involved with it, it's going to be real messy, and I don't want to do that. So the first thing is to helping someone in poverty is to think about accepting the fact that we do have these barriers. The second thing is to acknowledge the fact that, God is in it if there's going to be any work done. Sometimes we feel like we have so much of the responsibility, and it's such an awesome type of task to really move the needle on poverty. And if we work real hard, we think we can do it. And sometimes we come into an area we just call compassion fatigue. I've tried, it hadn't worked, I'm done. If we prayed as hard about a person or a relationship or helping someone in poverty as we worked at it sometimes, maybe the result would be different. The other thing is educating yourself on the issues facing poverty. In our staff at Hope Works, we read a lot of books that help us become more educated. If you hear someone say, I've got 20 years experience. Well, is it really 20 years experience, or is it 1 year experience repeated 20 times? I think sometimes in churches we have the desire to help, but if we do the same thing every time and don't try to look at other ways to be more effective, then we have the same results. One book that we read recently is a book by Bob Lupton. It's called Toxic Charity. And like the title of Toxic Charity, sometimes your charity, your interest in helping, can become toxic, and it can hurt the person in poverty. In fact, one of the things that characterizes his book, he says, when you try to help somebody and you help them in so much of a way that they could really help themselves, it's the kindest way to destroy a person. So he really makes a major message in this. Another book titled Helping Without Hurting is a book that sometimes this idea of really helping someone, we think we're helping them, we're actually hurting them by the methods that we're using. We're enabling, and we're not being like a coach and kind of helping. Ruby Payne is a friend of mine that has written a pretty dramatic book, Framework of Poverty, and what she will say is that there are hidden rules in middle class, in poverty. Those in poverty, they have to understand these hidden rules in order to get out. And my pitch to those that want to help people in poverty is there's hidden rules in people in poverty that you have to understand in order to be effective. Tattoos of the Heart is probably the most popular book that our staff has read. It's about a man in Los Angeles who worked with gangs. He has created an industry called Homeboy Industries, and it's really effective. Together on your site, there'll be a book list. See if I can get to this. That's right. Here, you push it, come this way. Well, you'll see the book list. There it is. Just different books that will help. The idea is if you become more proficient in understanding people in poverty, then you can become better. Oftentimes in a social media section, if you'll follow nonprofits that deal in an area, then you'll be able to see what they're doing well. Getting to know someone living in poverty is a way to really help. Dr. Comer, who's a well-known authority really in education, says there's no significant change unless there's a significant relationship. And so what that means is it's pretty easy to give something on a holiday and feel warm and filled, but the reality is until you really invest the time with a person, sometimes the results will not be the same. And that investment of time it can be messy. Finding a common ground. Sometimes a lady who has children, and I have children, but I'm not a mother, as you can tell. But those are common grounds that someone in poverty and someone who's trying to help can talk about children and have those connections. I know in Memphis, Tennessee, surprisingly, you can take someone who's middle class, someone who's never been involved in poverty, someone who's never been in trouble, and you can take someone who's in poverty and who's been in trouble, who's dropped out of school, and has spent a life just on couch surfing and have no complete connection. And yet you can bring up the term basketball in the University of Memphis or Grizzlies, and all of a sudden there is a real connection. So someone helping a person in poverty can develop that relationship. Another thing is to narrow your passion about helping someone in poverty. And that narrowing of passion, you can't do everything for everybody. So maybe if your passion is helping someone who's hungry, if your passion is helping someone get out of prison and be able to get a job, then kind of focus that and not take everything at one time. And then get involved in a nonprofit. Get involved at a local church. The key thing is involvement, and those are practical ways to do that. I guess the biggest message that I would send as my time comes to a close is this. All of us can make a difference. All of us can do something. Sometimes we feel like because the government's involved or because large corporations are involved, we really can't do anything. We really can't move the needle. What can we do to help people in poverty? It's just too big an area. But the reality is we can make a difference in a person's life. And that difference can be transformational, can be a way not only just to find a job, but to help someone get closer to God, closer to Christ. This past week, I had a gentleman that spent 18 years in prison. There's no way in the world when he came out, even though he wants to become a man, as he would say, and provide for himself, there's no way he's going to get a job because the offense that he had was too difficult for anyone to take a risk. There's a member at this church that was instrumental in allowing him to get a job. And without that relationship with that Christian man and this gentleman coming out of prison, the chances of him going back to prison, 60, 70%. But it's that connection that can turn a life. And most people who come out of prison and don't get jobs, they just go back into poverty. So all of us can make a difference. And I just encourage you to do that.
We're good. Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be here in the wonderful land of Memphis. I have traveled many, many miles from Nashville. I'm kidding. But it's great to be here. I want to tell the audience here and there that I am a sleepy person. But I'm excited to be here. I am the executive director of Nashville Inner City Ministry. And what I want to use with my time is give you a story of myself, because here we are, and I'm very excited to be here at the Great Oaks Church of Christ, because I'm excited about what they're wanting to do and what they're already achieving. Fighting poverty, from my perspective, is something that our God has commanded us to do, to address the issue, to address the needs, and to do it consistently in love, because it demonstrates, obviously, our relationship and our connection to Him. And so here, rather at Inner City, when I was introduced to that work, there were incredible challenges. However, it was not as foreign to me, because I considered myself to come from poverty. My grandmother lived in the very projects that we reach out to. And so I do remember running around in the community, just growing up, and with my aunts and uncles during that time. My grandmother was the matriarch, and I was the first grandchild of the family. And along with that came a lot of different things. But poverty and my connection to it, well, it's interesting, because growing up, I knew we were poor. We didn't have a whole lot of stuff. And the people around us, they were poor. But you know, there were some things that I had that some individuals did not have. And I'm going to try to get to this, because this is how, in my opinion, we address poverty consistently. And that is, I had the blessing of hope. 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 Translation. My family. And I come from a group, members of my family are drug addicts, criminals, and everything else. But they protected me. Not quite sure why, but they felt like they had to protect me. And in doing so, it provided hope, wherein I always felt that I could accomplish. I always felt that if I wasn't competent, it wouldn't take much for me to gain competency. And so because of that, I was able to achieve. Now, with that being said, in fighting poverty, the one thing that we recognize in inner city is when you look at individuals, the main issue is, can you assist them in what God wants for them? And that is hope, that someone believes in me, that they're not afraid of me. So with that being said, let me give you a bit of a synopsis so you can understand what we do at Inner City as we fight poverty. Now, the things that we do, now we are what we call, well, I call it, we are nothing more than an out-of-control bus ministry that is still cranking. And we're just, we have a ton of buses, and we pick up over 800 at-risk children every week during the school year. And we pick them up from the housing communities. So when we say, hey, poverty, this is how we look at it. Well, the children that we serve all have assistance, governmental assistance. The children that we serve, the majority, 80%, if not more, come from a single family household. The children that we serve, the majority of them are 4 or 5 reading levels behind in school. The majority of them have a relative who are incarcerated or have been incarcerated. That's our picture of poverty. And so how do we approach it? It was already said by Wade. Wade did a wonderful job. Our approach, you got to love them. You just got to love. And what we call, you got to have street credibility. And we would say, you know what? Jesus had a whole lot of street credibility when you see him in the Gospels. That's why everyone would run to him, not just for his miraculous powers, but he was compassionate. That he treated everyone with a great deal of compassion. And so our approach is you reach the young people, and they're rough. And you get all of the challenges of poverty, everything. And one of the main things that you get from reaching out to a community that's struggling with poverty is that there are so many needs that they're overwhelming. Now, our goal is a little bit different because we were in it to share faith and ultimately to plant a congregation, because we felt the most important thing, that those who are struggling and who are without hope, is to have Christian folks who would say this: we're not just going to serve you. We want to partner with you. We want you to sit on the same pew that we sit on. And that was our difference. And so unlike some nonprofits who would kind of rush in, then rush out, we just stayed there. And so we're very much a part of their family. To be actual with you is that our young people build such a strong relationship with us that, but believe it or not, we are dealing with the 4th generation of believers. Now, they're realizing that when kids are having children at age 16, that kind of goes quickly. So here we are, we pick up that massive number of young people, and we're into our 4th generation. But here's the kicker, is that poverty brings about such ugliness. We want to be careful with that, but it's ugly at times. And what I want to say about this is this: one of the things that equips us to fight poverty is that it can no longer be ugly. I don't want to deal with it. I want to run away. I want to ignore it. But it should be something that we run to. Let me give you an example. When you look at the young people that we serve, I'll be the first one to say, you have to embrace, you have to love. And that means we have to paint a different picture of what we call success. Because when we place perhaps middle-class values on the people that we serve, here is the problem that we face. It's that their value system may simply not be our value system. And then we get so frustrated. Here's our picture. When I look at my life, being poor, I was given a label. You know what that label was? He's an overachiever. Now, what does that mean? I think he just might go to college. I think he just might do some great things. That's an overachiever. You know what? You know how, everybody likes the cute, pretty kid? Everybody likes the overachiever. Like, get around and But what about everybody else? Overachievers are still the minority. When you look at the majority of individuals who are struggling in poverty, they're not overachievers. And so our perspective must change. And so instead of saying, you know what? We're in your life because we believe you can be a doctor, you can be a dentist, you can be all these different things. Well, what happens when, hello, man, I'm not even sure you're going to graduate. That's where we feel the relationship becomes so important. Because when we go hand in hand and we share a mission of transformation, a mission of outreach, that's where we found the avenue to fight poverty. We asked the individuals, let's walk together with Christ. Let's do this together. We're going to reach this city together. We're going to praise God and we're going to endure all the challenges in life together. And that's pretty much our approach. Do you get bruised up? Look at me. Got all these bruises. I'm kidding. Yeah, you get bruised up. But there's healing in the love of the Lord, where you see individuals who at one point did not have hope, and you prove to them that you're worth me placing hope in you. And that's when they finally get the inkling that my life is more than broken bricks. My life is more than shattered glass. My life is more than all of the abuse that has come in my life, because I have a mission to achieve. But most importantly, I have a family to achieve it with. Now that's my introduction, and we're going to come back and discuss a bit more after this 3-minute break.
Well, if I could ask the God, if I could get in touch with the God and have the opportunity to ask Him, I would ask why there is so much difference between people. If everybody is son of God, as they claim, why there is so much difference and why there is so much hatred?
You want to elaborate on the difference, like races or gender? Or?
Everything, gender, race, country, everything. People seem to think they're all different. I mean, they're not united. I'm not saying united is a very idealistic word, but at least you can think that why there is so much fighting and there is so much hatred and so much jealousy in man, and when is it going to end, all these things?
Welcome back to 12 Questions Memphis. Glad you're still up with us. Really happy you're here. We're here with two wonderful men. They've had great insights for us, and we're happy to have your questions. Continue to ask your questions. We're going to talk here for about 30 minutes, so we're going to go right at it. I'll start with you, Ron. To help us not be ignorant, what are the 3 leading reasons those in poverty are not ready to be employed?
From my experience at Hope Works, I would say 3 reasons. The first one would be incarceration. And I think we talked a little bit about that, and Larry mentioned in his experience, just because someone has been incarcerated does not mean that once they get out of prison that they have a pretty easy path to get a job. There are incredible amount of barriers, not the least of which is unemployment, but there's housing, there's issues of going back to the same environment, there's oftentimes a standoffish, stiff arm by churches. There's a variety of reasons. So at Hope Works, one of the things that we try to work with is teaching the students how to interview and how to not run away from the problems that they've had in being incarcerated, but kind of how to work with that. And then we try to work with employers. And employers are another difficulty because there's fear and uncertainty. So one of the reasons that students or graduates are unemployed is because they bring some baggage with them, and oftentimes that baggage is incarceration. Second reason I think someone is not employed is from an educational standpoint. It's amazing to me how many men and women do not have a high school diploma. In fact, in Shelby County, 93,000 people do not have a high school diploma. Well, what that means is that when you go to interview for a job, if you don't have a high school diploma, then it's just really extremely difficult, to get a job. The third reason I think is just exposure and just a safety net, a group of people that provide hope, like Larry mentioned, to surround the person and actually make sure they can believe in themselves. So if you don't have that, then it's really difficult. So those are my 3.
Just before I want to be sure and get to this, how can you're in Memphis here at HopeWorks? What are some ways that we can help at HopeWorks just real quickly? I know you mentioned a few right there, but
well, actually, talk about those 3 real quick. One is provide employers that will give interviews and second chances for people that we would endorse. In fact, from HopeWorks, in order to graduate through the program, you have to have good attendance, you have to be drug-free, and you have to be motivated. So an employer who looks at those items can say, okay, rather than hiring someone off the street, let me hire someone who has that background. So one way would be employers at a church this size and other churches throughout Memphis. There are people in HR or there are people that have some influence that can actually pave that way.
Larry, do you have anything to add about poverty and people finding employment while they're in poverty?
Well, now, my experience with working with young and old, what I have found, and I can't necessarily categorize them, but what I would add to to what Ron already shared, is not developing at a young age because of the culture what we call work ethic, and that is hard to teach because it's something that you have to be motivated to want to achieve. And my experience when it comes to work ethics or a work ethic is that the great challenge is that when a young or older person, if one thing doesn't go quite right, it wipes out the whole day. Mm-hmm. And obviously, you cannot maintain employment if one bad or difficult thing happens to you, you go flat. And so that is what I consider one of the challenges. I'll make that number 4. How about that? Okay.
Sounds good. We have a question here. Is it better to help in a way that may hurt than not help at all, or are they equally as bad?
That's an interesting question. This is what I believe. I'm sure I hurt a lot of people, loving them probably the wrong way. I think the key is to learn and to grow, because once you get into it, once you recognize, for instance, once you recognize that your involvement, if it is becoming toxic and you made aware, then you adjust. But it's still hard to outweigh the benefits of a loving heart that wants to do right. And I think it's still better to try to assist, even though you may be doing it all wrong. And the way I illustrate that is I have children. And you know, sometimes I kind of think they're going to come and say, well, you know, you really did that wrong, Dad. And I'm going to say, well, you know what? You're going to have to forgive me. Because I was Papa, and I probably did it wrong, but I'm trying not to do it wrong now. So it's kind of like loving people. Sometimes maybe we just didn't know what to do until we were made aware.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that too, I really think as well the effort and the motivation to help people. You know, in Matthew 25, when Jesus, you know, talks about, well, when I was hungry, you gave me something to eat, and when I needed something to wear, when I was in prison, you visited me, all that. And so, you know, the motivation is to do that. I guess the scary part for me is that, am I doing it well? I mean, it's pretty easy to check that box and say, okay, I've done that. And so sometimes I really feel like that I have hurt people by not allowing them to help themselves. Sometimes we feed our own ego by being the guy on the white horse that comes in and tries to help somebody and feel good. But in reality, have you really helped them? So it's, you know, I don't want to stroke myself. I really need to be more interested in am I helping?
Can you speak more about the humility it takes we don't want to come in having all the answers necessarily to help those in poverty? You kind of alluded to it there.
Well, it's kind of like Larry and I talked before we came up. You know, the more you know, the more you realize how little you know. And so I think that just giving the effort isn't necessarily all that you can be. You just can't be everything that you want to just by giving effort. You have to educate yourself.
We have a question. What should the church do, or can the church do, to better fight poverty? And maybe give some examples of churches that have done this well.
Well, I think what the church can do is simply be salt and light. On one end, I think this is one of the greater challenges for congregations, and that is, okay, how? How? Because I think one has to accept, if you're going to fight poverty, what does that mean for your congregation, really? I'll give you this example. To fight poverty means to love people, to love people and be concerned about their development and them becoming independent, as much independent as they can. So when we use the term, what can the church do? I think the church has to have a posture where we simply do not give up on people. Now, that means a lot, because eventually that may mean you're sitting next to someone who smells a little bit funny on Sunday morning. You may end up, reaching out to one person may mean that now I've reached out to a whole group of people that cannot fit in my car any longer. Well, fighting poverty is about reaching and loving people. So I would say always being open to some of the challenges that comes along with that. If we're just open and not becoming frustrated when our value system are challenged by the people that we're loving. That's what I think the church can do.
What does that last thing mean?
Well, here's the clearest example. Let's say I'm raising my children, and now my child has an arsenal of new words to use. And it's kind of like, you know what? I don't think the answer is you don't need to hang around them anymore. Because that clash in values, although sometimes we have to protect our kids, what are we teaching? And so there's a balance between reaching, teaching, mentoring, and here's the key, preparing our family as we're preparing those that we're reaching out to. And that has nothing to do with now the clash of values. Because if the most important value is loving Jesus, we have to accept that if I remain in poverty, am I still okay with God? And that's a real challenge, because I remember when I was dealing with some young people and I said, hey, don't you guys want to have a job and buy a car? And one of them said, no. I just shut down my conversation because I couldn't compute that. But you know what I learned? That wasn't his value system. It simply wasn't his value system. He said, no, I don't need a car. I don't need a car. And so what he made me realize is I'm just trying to serve Jesus where I am. All right, okay. I had to learn that.
I'd like to make a comment about what churches can do. And I think we, at Hope Works, we've been focused more recently on prison ministry. I remember visiting with this lady at Mark Luttrell Correction Center, and we have a worship service on Sunday afternoon. And so as we visited, she was going to get out recently, and she said, Ron, when I get out, while I'm here, we have a lot of churches that come and want to talk about Jesus, but you know what? When I get out, no one's going to want to deal with me because I'm coming out as a felon. And she said, why is that? Well, I didn't have a great answer, but my feeling is that in the churches, we really don't embrace people coming out of prison. We just don't. It's our ignorance and our fear. Do you know that 1 out of every 99 American adults are incarcerated? 1 out of every 31 are in jail, probation, or parole. 95% of everybody who goes to prison comes out. It's an incredible field for churches to embrace. But for some reason, we're not aware of it or we're fearful of it, and yet it's the people that Jesus talked about in Matthew 25. So I think it's really something that a church could incredibly be involved with, and something that there's a need for volunteers. In fact, I had this prison contact me, the chaplain at Whiteville, and said, I need somebody to come and take every other Sunday. Will someone do that? Come and preach. And so, we're in the process of hopefully getting that. But most people in churches, most churches do not get involved in any form of prison ministry. And those that get involved with it, they burn out quickly because they can't get any support and help.
Is another question. How do we properly balance caring and physical needs or caring for physical needs with caring for spiritual needs?
Well, you can't start caring for the spiritual needs a lot of times until you care for the physical needs. And so, when we, our deal is simply to do both, and I'm just going to illustrate it. Pick up the kids, pick them up, get them on the bus, and so we're riding on the bus, and we learn something, is that if you're going to have spiritual impact, make sure it's a fun event. The last thing people need to have is a horrific experience trying to learn about God and His people. So we get on the bus, and the first step of discipleship is we're singing Christian songs. Then we get to a learning center, which is a church, and then we have to coach our individuals there, because they come to the table and they have their lessons, and they're going, man, we're going to teach this lesson. I mean it, okay? And they come to realize, well, we can't finish the lesson. Why? Because the kids are kind of out of control. What you mean? They're out of control and they're hungry. So they find themselves teaching less, in their opinion, feeding more. And then we have to remind them, I think the lesson that you're teaching is the biblical lesson. They don't have to know that they don't have to know that biblical story, because you have become the story. You are the illustration of the gospel of Jesus Christ now. So don't get frustrated with the spiritual lessons, that you want them to get 3 points. They've already gotten the 3 points. You love me. That's all they need.
Yeah, and I agree. I think you need both. I will say that the physical part is much easier. And the spiritual part involves not just the rhetoric and not just thinking that someone has a funnel on their head and you're just going to talk about the gospel and it's going to sink in. The spiritual piece is developing more of a relationship and more of a trust and more of a peer relationship, so that I need God as well and as much as you do, and both of us are struggling to try to get to God.
What can middle class families and parents especially, what can they do to change the dynamic in their home of really making an emphasis on helping those in poverty?
Well, my boys, all they know is the middle class lifestyle that God is able to give them. And that's the lifestyle that we wanted to give them, and God blessed us to give that to them. I think the greater gift, obviously, as Christian parents, what we've been able to do with our boys is simply help them in the mission of Christ. So that means our our boys have grown up in this urban setting, reaching out to a city with what they just call their friends and brothers and sisters in Christ. So they come over to our house. We have cookouts. We have disagreements. We have all kind of issues. And so what happens is that they have simply grown up with a church family, and some of their brothers and sisters in Christ simply struggle in poverty, more so than maybe others. So to answer the question, I think what the middle class church can do is allow the inclusion of the struggle, the drama, to come into your family where it doesn't overwhelm your family, but it's a part of your family.
I think education, too, is a major key. Let me recommend a movie that I think is a terrific movie, a true story. It's called McFarland. It's a story about a man who became a cross-country coach. He didn't run cross-country in high school, didn't run track, never coached it, never did anything. And he's in an area and helping people in poverty to get out of poverty. But the reason he did that so well was, one, is he educated himself. He became a student of cross-country running. And then he formed a relationship with those students. And so the end result was just, I don't want to tell you, if you hadn't seen the movie, to mess it up.
Spoiler alert.
But it had a good ending. But it really seemed to tell the story, education and then a sincere involvement in their life. And I think that is really what Christians should do. But you have to educate yourself, and that's what he did.
We have a question. Where is the line between if a man shall not work, he shall not eat, and helping impoverished people?
I don't know. Ron looking at me. Okay. Well, I tell you what, I have to deal with that a whole lot just in ministry, because the culture that we find ourselves ministering in, we have used the term, unfortunately, individuals, some, not every individual, but a lot of individuals who grow up in poverty kind of carry that term users. And I'm trying to use it not in a negative term, but that's a survival way of life that you have to use people. Now, as far as, if you don't work, you don't eat, the responsibility and the principle is still there. And I think you get there, and I think the Apostle Paul kind of helped us with that language, because he was able to speak to them as a father is speaking to a group. And so a lot of times the strength of the relationship brings about more change, from my experience. Because when you point your finger at someone and say, hey, you know what? Maybe you don't deserve to eat because you're not working. I don't see that as being effective. I can tell you what's been effective in my experience, and that is when they know I love, and they know I fed, and they know that I know the game that they're playing. When you begin to rip it all away and say, you know what, look, and I love you enough to let you go hungry because you can do better. We know you can do better.
What can the church learn from Jesus in helping those in
I'm not
poverty?
going to look at Larry this time.
Okay.
Well, Jesus is the answer.
Yes.
For all of that. And the church, whether the church is helping people in poverty or whether the recipient of someone in poverty, Jesus is really the only answer. And really the Scripture is the only answer as well. Unfortunately, since we live in a fallen world, we're supposed to work. You know, Solomon said there's nothing better in life than to eat, drink, and find satisfaction in your work. So if someone does work, that helps them feel better about themselves, help them feed their family, and to deprive them of that it hurts them.
Now, let me add just a little bit with what we can learn about Jesus, and I think this is the nugget I didn't put on what I said at first. You know, if we're loving someone and for whatever reason they're just not working, just not taking care of their responsibility, this is where the shared mission in Christ really takes a hold. Because my counsel has been this: when it seemed to be not ugly but greater discipline as it relates to Jesus, where the conversation will go like this: you know, this is what I don't get. You and I both know that we have certain amount of resources, and we both want to give to the Lord. I thought we both want to give to the Lord, but one of us seemingly are playing games. And it seems like you want me to give more resources to you than to other people. Now, where does Jesus fit in that picture? Getting back to mission. Because once we share the mission, it gets beyond the survival game. Why are we in relationship? I thought we were in this together. What are you doing?
Good point. Should I be concerned with how a person might use the funds I give them? No. And I'll add, this was one of the questions too, and sadly this is some of our only contact with poor people for a lot of people, is do we give to those who are begging on the street? Do we worry about what they're going to do with the money?
All right. I like Ron. You know what? Here is, I have a right and a wrong answer. I think it'll be a right and wrong response, perhaps. You know what? There are times we give indiscriminately the gift of love. But then there comes a responsibility, because maybe I didn't see what you did with it yesterday, and you're out there again. The question is, if you're still at the same spot, it's not, my funds not the issue anymore. It's me investing in you and trying to figure out what's going on. Maybe Monday, I don't know what you did with it. You got liquored up. But Tuesday, Thursday, or Wednesday, let's have a conversation. Let's kind of find out what's really going on. What's our plan? That's my answer.
I think for a nonprofit, or for a church, which is also a nonprofit, I think all the finances should be very open and very transparent. So if you're going to give to an organization, then you should be able to very clearly ask questions about where that money goes, and you should be able to come in at any time and analyze and make sure that what you're giving is going actually to what the church or the nonprofit says it's going to go to. So you just have to be transparent. There's no reason not to be.
We have time for maybe one, maybe two more questions. This one, helping some people helping people in poverty is not always moving them out of poverty, I think is what this question is getting at. So how do we define a win in helping people in poverty?
I think a win is two things. One is a spiritual win. It's not so much that someone doesn't have any money. If they're in poverty, they're under-resourced. Most likely, could be financial, could be emotional, could be spiritual. There's a lot of different things. So moving someone out of poverty is a goal, but not just from a financial standpoint. I have a staff member that came out of poverty, and he tells me, Ron, I like 1 foot in poverty and 1 foot in middle class because I enjoy that history, that life, and I'm not really ready to kind of give some of that, up.
That's tough, the win. I'm going to try to give this perspective. A win is not necessarily if it is an achievement. Now, I'm not too sure if the win is, you know what, my goal is for you to come out of poverty. I don't think that's really the win. The win from the Christ-centered perspective is that if I loved you as Christ has commanded me to love you, and I have embraced you, and if Christ has given me the opportunity to embrace you as my brother or as my sister in Christ, that is the win. Now, let me give you a little bit of picture, and I want to not be long-winded. There's been many a times where I had to do the eulogies at funerals, and you go before that, you look at that person or the body of that person in that casket, and sometimes your heart sinks, and you just kind of wonder, what did we do? And then there's a little voice that comes and says, you know what? She was loved. The gospel was shared. Did she struggle? Yes. Did she win? Yes. That's the win to me.
Okay, if you're driving home tonight, what do you wish you would have told us?
Well, I'll tell you what. Here is when I think about poverty, and the reason why I do what I do at Inner City, for Larry, this may not be true for anybody else, but when I was looking for work to put my hands on, and I went to Inner City, I saw white people, I saw black people, I saw middle-class people, I saw poor people. I saw Cadillacs, and I saw hoopties, and I saw people riding on the bus. And somehow in my mind at that point, I just said to myself, you know what? Boy, if there was going to be a Jerusalem Church of Christ, it would probably look a whole lot like this. And that group was living life. And that group wasn't just fighting poverty. That group was fighting the devil. And I think that's the picture. Because when you're fighting the devil, you're fighting a lot of fronts, and poverty is just one of them.
I think I would just say that life is so short that I heard a friend of mine say recently, I'm going to run hard till the end. And so we just try to give our best effort.
Yes.
Run hard to the end, and God's grace covers us.
Amen.
All the mistakes that we might make.
Amen.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking time to be here, for driving. Really blessed our lives, everyone who's online. And these videos will be archived. A lot of the archives are already up on our 12questionsmemphis.com site. So be sure and check those out. Tell your friends about them. We're done. 12 Questions Memphis. This was our last session. We ended on a great note, trying to help those in need. Such a great topic to think about, change our family, change our mission. So thank you so much for being here. Check our archives out online. We're here at Great Oaks Church of Christ in Memphis. We hope that you check out our website, www.greatoaks.org. We love to, if you contact us, we'd love to talk to you. We'd love to get to know you. Visit us here on Sundays or any time during the week. We'll be here. We'd love to talk to you. Hope you have a good night.